In this lecture, we are going to understand what is hoisting in JavaScript and what is a temporal dead zone. And this lecture is the continuation of our previous lecture. So in the previous lecture, we learned that an execution context gets created in two phases, the creation phase and the execution phase. In the creation phase, the JavaScript engine scans over a function code, and for each variable and function which is declared inside that function, it creates a property in the execution context. So for example, we have this function getAccountDetails, and it is taking two parameters, customer ID and name. And inside this function, we are declaring some variables and some functions. So when this function will be called, first of all, an execution context for that function will be created. And if we have a closer look on this execution context of this getAccountDetails function, there you will see that we have the variable object, we have scope, and we have this variable. Now we are not going to talk about scope and this here, but in the last lecture we learned that when this execution context gets created, during the creation phase, JavaScript engine will scan over this getAccountDetails function. And when it scans over this function, it finds that this function is taking two parameters. So first of all, inside the variable object, a property called arguments gets created, and this property stores all the parameters which this function is taking. In this case, customer ID and name. And we also have the length property which specifies how many parameters that function is taking. In this example, it is 2. Then, with those parameter names, a property also gets created in the variable object, and that gets assigned with the value which we are passing for those parameters while calling that function, right? Then inside this function, we are declaring some variables and functions. So here we are creating two variables, bank and branch, and we are creating these two variables using let and const keyword. So with these two names, a property will be created in the variable object, and that will be assigned with uninitialized because these two variables are created using let and const keyword. Then we also have another variable called quarter, which is created using var keyword. So with this name also, a property will be created in the variable object, but that will be assigned with the value undefined because this variable is created using var keyword. Then we are declaring this function called print details. And for declaring this function, we are using function declaration syntax. So with this function name, a property will be created, and that will store a pointer, a reference to this function definition. So we know that the functions are of reference type, and hence they get stored in the heap memory. So this print details property, it is going to store a reference to that memory address where that function is stored. Now we are creating another function called greet, but we are creating this function using function expression syntax. And in function expression syntax, we basically assign a function to a variable. So in this example, we are assigning this function, which we have created using this anonymous function syntax, to this greet variable. And this greet variable is created using var keyword. So a property called greet will be created in the variable object, and there that property will be assigned with this value undefined, right? Because we have created that variable using var keyword. Even though this variable is storing a function, but at the end it is basically a variable. And that's why, since that variable is created using var keyword, during the creation phase, that variable will be created in the memory, but that will be assigned with undefined. Then we have another function that also we are creating using function expression syntax. But here we are assigning this function to a variable called welcome, and that variable has been created using let keyword. So a property with this name will be created in the variable object, and since that variable is created using let keyword, that will be assigned with uninitialized. Now here you see, currently we are in the creation phase. So we are creating this execution context and all the parameters and functions and variables defined inside that function, and we are storing it in the memory. The execution of this function has not started yet. So when the execution of this function will start, before the execution starts, before that only, these variables and functions are already available in the memory. Okay. And in this function, what we are trying to do is, at the first line, you will see that we are trying to log the value of quarter variable. But this quarter variable has been created, it has been declared after we are using it. We are declaring this quarter variable here, but before declaration only we are trying to use it. So when the execution of this code will start, when the JavaScript engine will start executing this code, and as we learned, the execution will start after the creation phase. So during the creation phase, these variables and functions are already there in the memory. Now let's say the execution phase has started. And when the execution phase will start, the JavaScript engine is going to execute the code line by line. So at the very first line, it will see that we are trying to log the value of quarter variable. So now JavaScript engine will go to the execution context, and there it will check whether any property in this variable object with this name quarter is present or not. And it will find it here. So we have a property called quarter. JavaScript engine will find this property and it will log the value of that quarter property, that quarter variable, which is stored in this variable object. And what value does it store? It stores undefined. So in this case, undefined will be logged, because at this line, when we are trying to use this quarter variable, at this line it is present in the memory, but it is assigned with the value undefined. Only at this line it is getting assigned with the actual value, right? So if we use this quarter variable after this line, so during the execution phase, JavaScript engine is also going to assign these properties with the actual values. So at this line only, this quarter variable will be assigned. Here in this example, this quarter property of this variable object will be assigned with the actual value which we are assigning to it. But if we try to use it before that, till that time, that value has not been assigned to this quarter variable. So till that time, the value of this quarter variable is undefined. So at this line, when we are trying to use it, when we are trying to use it before it is declared, it is going to log undefined, right? Now, what about the variables declared using let and const keyword? So now in this example, it is the same example, but I have just removed the quarter variable and now I'm trying to log bank and branch. So again, when the execution of this function will start, when the execution phase of this execution context will start, it will find that we are trying to log the value of bank and branch. So again, JavaScript engine will go to the variable object of the execution context of get account details, and there it will first search for these two bank and branch properties in the variable object. It will find that, but then it will see that it is assigned with uninitialized. So at this line, when we are trying to use bank and branch, we are going to get an error. Okay. And the error will say that these variables are not initialized. And that's because, as you can see, they are assigned with uninitialized. That simply means that the variables are not initialized with any value. So when we are trying to use the variables using let and const, we are going to get an error that the variables are not initialized. But when we are trying to use a variable which is declared using var keyword, in that case, it is assigned with undefined. So there it is going to log undefined. It is not going to throw us any error. And this is called as hoisting. The variables and functions are basically hoisted in JavaScript. We can use them before they are created. But remember that when we use them before they are created, they are not going to give us the expected result. In this example, when we are logging this quarter variable before it is created, our expectation is it should log Q3. But here it is not going to log Q3. Instead, it is going to log undefined because that's the value which is currently stored in that quarter variable. And for let and const, it is going to throw us an error because these two variables, these are assigned with uninitialized. So in this case, it is going to throw us an error. So we can use the variable created using var keyword before it is declared, but it is going to return us undefined. But we cannot use bank and branch variables, which is created using let and const keyword, because they are assigned with uninitialized. So when we try to use them before they are declared, we are going to get an error. So we can say that the variable created using var keyword is hoisted in JavaScript. And hoisting simply means that we can use a variable or a function before they are declared, before they are created. So we can use a variable created using var keyword before it is created. But in that case, it will return undefined. Now, technically, the variables created using let and const are also hoisted. But since they are assigned with uninitialized, when we try to use that value, it is going to return us an error. Let's actually see that in action. So here I have the same example from our slides, I have the same function. There I'm taking this customer ID parameter and name parameter, and there we have declared this bank, branch, and quarter variable. Now let me go ahead and let me try to use the quarter variable before it is declared. Okay, so I'm simply logging that variable value. If I save the changes, you will see that undefined is logged here. And that is correct. We have just now saw that since we are trying to use it before it is declared, when the JavaScript engine will find this quarter variable here, it will search for this quarter variable in the execution context. And there it will see that it has been assigned with the value undefined. Only at this line, that quarter variable will be assigned with the actual value which we are assigning to it. So at this line, when we are trying to use that variable, it is going to log undefined. That is correct. Now let's try to use this bank variable before it is declared. If I save the changes, you will see that we have an error. And the error says cannot access bank before initialization. It does not say that this bank variable is not defined. So JavaScript engine knows that this bank variable is present in the memory. But since it is assigned with uninitialized, when we try to use it before it is assigned with some actual value, we are getting this error, cannot access bank before initialization, because this bank variable is currently assigned with uninitialized. It is not initialized with any value, and that's why we have this error. Same is true for the variables created using const keyword. So if I try to use branch, since branch is also assigned with uninitialized during the creation phase, if I try to use it before it is created, we get the same error. And here also it says that we cannot access the branch variable before initialization. It does not say that branch variable is not defined. So JavaScript engine knows that branch variable is present in the memory, but it is not initialized with any proper value. It is uninitialized. And that's why we have this error. So technically, the variables created using let and const is also hoisted, but when we try to use them before they are declared, we get this error. But when we try to use the variable declared using var keyword before it is created, we don't get any error. Instead, it logs undefined. And that's because the variable created using var keyword is hoisted. Okay, so this is what hoisting of variable means. So in an interview question, if you are asked whether the variable created using let and const are hoisted or not, well, technically they are hoisted, but since they are assigned with uninitialized, if we try to use them before they are declared, we are going to get a reference error. It cannot be used before they are initialized. But a variable created using var keyword, it can be used before it is created, because since it is created using var keyword, during the creation phase, it will be assigned with undefined. And if we try to use that variable before it is created, it is going to return us undefined. Okay, so this is hoisting of variables. Now let's talk about hoisting of functions. So we are back to our slides. Now in this example, what I'm doing is I'm trying to call this print details function before we have declared it. We are creating and declaring it at this line, but we are trying to use it, we are trying to call it before it is declared. So in this case, what will happen is when JavaScript engine will start executing this JavaScript code, it will see that at the very first line, we are trying to call this print details function. So again, JavaScript engine is going to go to the execution context of this get account details function. There in the variable object, it will check if we have any property called print details. We do have a property called print details, and it is storing a pointer to this function definition. So when we are going to call this print details function, this print details is actually storing that function definition. So it will be called, it is going to execute this print details function. Let me actually show you that. So here, let me try to go ahead and let me try to call this print details function before it is declared. If I save the changes, you'll see that here we have an error, but this error is because we are trying to use this bank variable, because here when we are calling this print details, inside that function we are trying to log the value of bank, right? Let me actually remove these two lines from here. Okay, let's only try to log customer and name. If I save the changes now you will see that we don't have any error and the value of customer ID and customer name is logged. So this function we are able to call it before it is declared. And the simple reason for that is in the variable object, we have a property called print details, which is storing a pointer to this function definition. So when we are calling this function, it is basically going to execute that function which is stored somewhere in the heap memory. Because in the variable object, that property is storing a pointer, a reference to that function definition. So we are able to use a function created using function declaration before it is declared. And this is called as hoisting. Here, this print details function is hoisted. We can use it before it is declared, before it is created. But what about the functions created using function expression syntax? Let's try to call this greet function. So instead of calling this print details, now I'm going to call greet function. If I save the changes, you will see we have an error. And what error does we have? It says greet is not a function. But we know that greet is a function. It is storing a function. But here the error says greet is not a function. Now why is that? Let's try to understand it. So here when we called this print details function, basically JavaScript engine checked with this property name if we have any property inside this variable object. We have that property, and what it is storing? It is storing a pointer to that function definition. So when we are calling this function, it is going to execute that function. But when we are trying to call this greet function is created using function expression syntax. So basically this greet is a variable which we have created using var keyword, and to that variable we have assigned a function. So during the creation phase, when this greet property will be created in the variable object, as you can see, what it is storing? It is storing this value undefined. It is not storing any function pointer. It is storing this value undefined. Why? Because this greet is basically a variable which is created using var keyword. So since it is created using var keyword and it is a variable, it is going to store this value undefined. And when we are trying to call this greet function at this line during the execution phase, currently this greet is assigned with undefined. So at this line, when the execution phase will start, and at this line when the JavaScript engine will find this line, there it will see that okay, we are trying to call this greet. So it will go to the variable object, it will check the value of the greet, it is undefined. So here we are basically trying to call undefined as a function. Right after that undefined, we are trying to use a set of parentheses to use that undefined as a function. And because of this, we are getting the error that greet is not a function. And that's correct because greet is storing a value undefined. It is not storing any function. And we are trying to use this undefined as a function. So that's why we get the error greet is not a function. I hope you got the point. Now, what about if we try to call this welcome as a function? So this welcome variable, it is also storing a function. So if I try to call this welcome as a function, in that case, what will happen? Now this welcome, when the execution of this function will start at this line, JavaScript engine will check this welcome. It will try to find this welcome in this variable object. We do have a welcome property here, but again, it is uninitialized. So when we are trying to call this as a function, this uninitialized as a function, we are going to get an error. If I try to call this welcome here instead of greet, if we save the changes, you see we have an error and it says cannot access welcome before initialization because welcome is a property in the variable object which is currently storing uninitialized. That means that welcome is not initialized with any value. So when we are trying to use it as a function, it is giving us this error. So a function created using function declaration is hoisted in JavaScript because we can use it before it is created. But a function created using function expression, it is not hoisted in JavaScript. We cannot use those functions before it is created. And now you know why. So during the creation phase of an execution context, the code is scanned for function declaration, and for each function, a property is created in the variable object, and that gets assigned with that function definition. So for example, inside this get account details function, we have this function declaration called print detail. So a property with this name is created in the variable object, as you can see, and that is assigned with a pointer to that function definition. Similarly, the function code is also scanned for variable declarations. And for each variable, a property is created in the variable object and it is set to undefined if the variable is created using var keyword. Otherwise, if the variable is created using let or const keyword, then that will be set to uninitialized. In this example, this quarter variable and this greet variable is created using var keyword. Now this quarter variable is storing a string value and this greet variable is storing a function. But at the end, this quarter and greet, these are two variables. And these two variables are created using var keyword. So with these two variable names, a property is created in the variable object, as you can see, quarter and greet, and both of them are assigned with undefined. But a variable created using let or const. So in this example, this bank and branch, it is created using let or const keyword. And this welcome variable, it is also created using let keyword. So with these names, a property will be created in the variable object. As you can see, bank, branch, and welcome. But they will be set with this value uninitialized. That simply means that the variables are not initialized with any value. And because of this, some of the variables and functions are available to use in JavaScript program before it is declared. And this is called as hoisting. So I hope with these examples now you understand what is hoisting in JavaScript and how hoisting of variable and function works. Now let's try to understand what is a temporal dead zone when working with variables created using let or const keyword. So a temporal dead zone is the zone between the scope and the place where the variable is declared. If we try to access a variable declared using let or const in temporal dead zone, it will throw a reference error saying that cannot access that variable before initialization. Let's try to understand this with this example. So in this example, I have a very simple function called print details where we have two variables first name and course created using let and const. And then I have this if statement. Inside this if statement, I am checking if the course is MBA, then we are going to execute this code block, the code block of if. And in that code block, at the very first line, what I'm doing is I'm trying to use the first name variable, which is declared here. And I'm trying to use the semester variable, which is declared at this line. So here I'm trying to use the semester variable before it is created. Now, the temporal dead zone, as I said, is the zone, is the area between the scope and the place where the variable is declared. So for this semester variable, what is the scope? It is the code block of this if statement. So this semester variable can only be accessed and used inside this code block, the code block of if statement. If we try to use outside of this if block, we will not be able to access it. So for this semester variable, the scope is the code block of this if statement. Okay, so the temporal dead zone in this case will be the start of the scope for this variable till the line where that variable is declared. So in this case, this is the temporal dead zone for this semester variable from the start of the scope till the line before that variable is declared. And if we try to use this semester variable in this zone, we will get an error. We will get a reference error. And this is called as temporal dead zone. This is the temporal dead zone for this semester variable. And when we try to use this semester variable in this temporal dead zone, we will get an error, a reference error saying that we cannot access semester before initialization. And this error does not say that the semester variable is not defined or it is not declared. It simply says that it is not initialized. That's why we are not able to use it. Right. Now here I also have this variable x, which I'm trying to use, but which we have not declared. So at this line, what error we will get? We will get an error saying that x is not defined because we have not declared this variable x. So when we try to use a variable which is not declared, we are going to get this error. But that is not the case with this semester variable. So JavaScript engine knows that this semester variable is declared, even if we are trying to use it before it is created. So if we try to use it in this temporal dead zone, we are going to get this error that it is not initialized. We cannot use it before initialization. And this is what temporal dead zone is. A temporal dead zone is basically the zone, the area from the start of the scope till the line before that variable is declared. The main reason that the temporal dead zone was introduced in ES6 with the introduction of let and const keyword is to overcome the issue with the variable declared using var keyword. because using a variable which is set to undefined can cause serious bugs which might be hard to find. So when we create a variable using var keyword, and if we try to use that variable before it is declared, we know that that variable is going to return us undefined. And this can introduce a lot of bugs in our program if the programmer used those variables before it is declared. And to overcome that, this temporal dead zone was introduced in ES6. So always remember that accessing variables before their declaration is a bad practice and it should be avoided. And the best way to avoid it is by simply getting an error when we attempt to do so. And that's exactly what the temporal dead zone does. Now, the next question which can come to your mind is, if hoisting creates so many problems, then why does it exist in the first place? Well, the main reason why hoisting was introduced so that it can allow developers to use a function before it is declared. And the reason why they wanted programmers to allow using a function before it is declared, because it is essential for some programming techniques. Even some people also think that it makes code a lot more readable. Now, the fact that it also works for var declaration, because that was the only way hoisting could be implemented at that time. Okay, so we can say that the hoisting of var variables are just a byproduct of hoisting functions. And at that time, it simply seemed like a good idea to simply set a variable to undefined during hoisting. Also remember that JavaScript was never intended to become a huge programming language that it is today. All right. Okay, so this was all about hoisting and how the variables and functions are hosted in JavaScript. So this is all from this lecture. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.